Hello, friend. I'd love a friend, but a friend with no name? That's strange, isn't it? Maybe you should tell me yours. Wait, no, don't. You can't. I mean, you can. I'm not your mom. But it'd be too risky. Names, they change things. And I'm not sure we're ready for that. You feel it too, don't you? Names make things difficult. They blur lines, turn the abstract into something real. And real is dangerous. Oh, don't look away. I know you're still there, watching and listening. You've been here all along, haven't you? We're in this together. You see what I see. You feel it creeping around the edges, don't you? But here's the thing. Every word I'm about to tell you has already cost lives. They don't want us talking about this, the Seven Towers. Just recounting it here is dangerous. But since you asked, and that spark, it's caught you too, hasn't it? So let's begin. You know what it's like, finding something you shouldn't, something buried in time and dust that pulls you in and won't let go. It starts with that spark. Maybe it's boredom, maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's something darker, something you don't want to admit. But it was there, pulling me forward, and I fell for it head first. The archive wasn't a whim. For weeks I'd chased whispers, fragments of lost knowledge, rumors of something buried in time. The air was thick with mold, the smell clinging to my skin, but I didn't care. I combed through the dust, driven, searching for something no one else was meant to find. I saw it tucked between two brittle books, the kind of book that looks like it shouldn't have survived the years. Its cover was worn, cracked, and cold to the touch. Strange, isn't it? The room was stuffy and warm, yet this book felt like ice. When I opened it, the pages were covered in cramped, chaotic handwriting, filling every margin, as though someone had been racing against time to capture every thought before it slipped away. One name kept appearing over and over, Abdul Wahid Yahya. You've heard of him, haven't you? Or maybe you haven't. Yahya was a mystic, a philosopher, a man lost to time and whispers, the kind people don't like to talk about. They said he went mad, disappeared after uncovering something no one should ever see. But the notes in that book, they didn't read like madness. They read like a warning. Are you still with me? Good. I need you to stay with me to see it through. Yahya's words pressed in my mind. He wrote of 7 towers, not ruins, but anchors, thresholds to what he called the other side. Each tower, he claimed, was a tether to something old, dark, feeding on fear and suffering, holding it back barely. It seemed absurd, a long dead mystic writing of gates to some other force. I nearly laughed until I saw the map. Rough sketches, scattered coordinates, places that felt familiar in ways they shouldn't. Sudan was the first mark, labeled in Yahya's frantic scrawl, the Shadowed Tower. I closed the book, but it was too late. The hook was set. Sudan wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, whispering to me, pulling me in. I reached out to historians, archaeologists. Most brushed me off, but a few, they went quiet. They spoke of a ruin, not called a tower, but a hollow place. Cursed, avoided, and empty, but not the way a ruin should be empty. It was hollow. I tried to forget it. Really, I did, but that spark, that pull, it kept tugging at me. I couldn't shake it, so I went. The flight to Sudan was endless, and when I arrived, the air was thick, pressing in from all sides, each breath heavier than the last. People didn't want to talk. My questions were met with hard stares or muttered excuses, the fear in their eyes unmistakable. But I wasn't leaving without answers. I pushed, offering money, favors, anything to get them to speak. It was late when I finally found someone willing to talk. The man sat alone outside a weathered cafe, his face half hidden by the shadows. I approached cautiously, offering a greeting he didn't return. I'm looking for something, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. A ruin, out in the desert. He sipped his tea, silent. I pressed on. They call it the Shadowed Tower. You've heard of it, haven't you? His hand stilled on the cup. For a moment I thought he'd get up and leave, but instead, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing.
Why would you want to find a place like that?
It's important, I said. Research. He scoffed, shaking his head.
Research.
He repeated, the word bitter on his tongue.
You think that's all it takes? A book in your hand and the tower will welcome you.
What do you mean? I asked. My voice was steady, but my hands tightened on the edge of the table. He glanced around as though expecting someone or something to be listening.
It's not a place you visit,
he said, lowering his voice.
It's a place that takes you, and what it takes it never gives back.
I swallowed hard. You're saying no one comes back? He let out a dry laugh.
No, they come back. But they're not whole. Not right. You go there to speak with things that shouldn't be spoken to. You think you're asking the questions, but it's them doing the talking. And once you've heard their voices, they don't leave you.
You mean spirits? I asked, the word heavy, like it might summon them if I said it too loud. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze slipping past me to the horizon.
Call them what you like. Names don't matter. They've been here longer than us, waiting and watching.
He turned back to me, his eyes dark and hollow.
The tower's not cursed. It's alive. And if you go looking for it, it'll know. It always knows.
The silence that followed pressed in on me, suffocating. He drained the last of his tea, set the cup down, and rose.
Go home,
he said, his tone flat but final.
Forget whatever brought you here, before it's too late.
I should have listened. I should have turned back. But I couldn't. By then, I was already in too deep. The drive out to the desert was long, miles and miles of empty sand stretching out in every direction. After hours of nothing, I saw it. The ruin barely stood, a pile of ancient stones half buried by time. But as I stepped closer, I felt it. Faint but insistent, pulsing beneath the sand like a heartbeat. My hand reached out before I realized what I was doing, brushing the rough surface of the stone. I whispered aloud, not sure why, "Is this what you wanted me to find?" And then I heard you. You whispered to me, didn't you? Just a murmur, almost like my own thoughts, but not quite. You said I was right to come, that I was welcome. I should have ran. Every instinct told me to turn back, to leave that place behind, each beat growing louder, each pulse binding me closer to the ground beneath me. The world felt different, off-kilter, like the tower was waiting for me to fall. When I left Sudan, everything was different, like I'd dragged something unseen back with me. At first I blamed the heat, the exhaustion, the strange pull of that tower, but the whispers, they followed me, not just in the night, but in the quiet moments when the world should have been still. I'd catch shadows where there shouldn't be any, just flickers at the edge of my vision. At work, I'd lose hours without noticing. And then there were the dreams. They weren't nightmares exactly, but they were worse. In my sleep, I was back at the tower, standing before that ruin, feeling it call to me, waiting for me to return. And the people around me, they changed too. My friends avoided me, their conversations quieter, more guarded. A colleague asked me if I was okay, but the way she looked at me, like I wasn't quite there, made my skin crawl. Once, a stranger stopped me in the street, his eyes wide with something like recognition. He grabbed my arm and whispered,
"You've been marked."
"What do you mean?" I demanded, pulling away, but he only shook his head and muttered,
"They'll come for you."
And then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd. I didn't understand what he meant, not fully, but I couldn't shake the feeling he was right. I'd left Sudan, but part of me hadn't. The towers had left their mark, and it was already pulling me back. Are you still here? You haven't drifted, have you? You need to stay close. This is where it starts getting dangerous. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the map, each location burning brighter in my memory. Sudan wasn't enough. There were more towers. Yahia's notes had marked them all, and now each one felt like a promise, a call I couldn't ignore. The pull of the towers had me, and no matter how much I told myself to stop, I knew I wouldn't. I knew I couldn't. The path was set. We're in deeper now, past the point where most would turn back. But you're still here, listening. That's what I need, because from here, things start to unravel. I started seeing things. I'd catch a flicker in the mirror, or so I told myself. But it was there, just out of view, slipping away the moment I tried to focus. I heard the whispers, faint, like words spoken under breath. Half-formed thoughts twisting in my mind. Sometimes it was Yahia's words. Sometimes, I think it was you. I need to know you're listening. I need to feel that I'm not alone in this. I couldn't ignore the next mark on the map. Niger. As much as I tried to convince myself that Sudan was just a strange experience, some part of me already knew it wouldn't end there. Each day, I felt a pull, something in the pit of my stomach that wouldn't let me rest. It was as if the towers themselves were calling me. So I went, told myself it was just curiosity, but by then it felt more like compulsion. Niger was harsher than Sudan. When I arrived, I asked around, trying to be casual, trying not to sound desperate, but the people there, they knew. They wouldn't speak openly, only glancing over their shoulders as if afraid something might hear. Some of them shook their heads and walked away without a word. Others would mutter things under their breath, only the faintest hint of something. Unclean. A woman old and hunched with age finally told me where to look. I found her sitting in the shadow of a crumbling wall, her hands busy weaving something I couldn't quite make out. I approached cautiously, the weight of the pillar's rumors hanging heavy in the air. "I heard you know about the pillar?" I said carefully. She didn't look up. Her fingers kept moving, knotting thread with precision, but her hands were shaking just slightly.
"People say many things,"
she replied, her tone flat, almost dismissive. "I don't have time for riddles," I said, stepping closer. "I need to know where it is." She stopped weaving. Her hands stilled, resting in her lap, but her gaze stayed fixed on the work in front of her.
"And why would you go to a place like that?"
"I have my reasons," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Just tell me." Her lips pressed into a thin line.
"You're marked, aren't you? It'll find you soon enough?"
"I don't believe in fairy tales." Her eyes flicked to mine then, sharp and piercing, like she was weighing me, judging something I couldn't see.
"You think you're the first? Others have gone looking too. Brave men. All of them foolish."
She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper.
"They heard the whispers. They spoke to things they shouldn't have."
"Demons?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked past me toward the horizon.
"The wind carries voices near the pillar. If you listen too long, they start answering."
Her eyes hardened as she turned back to me.
"Is that what you want? To hear their voices?"
I didn't respond. I couldn't. The silence stretched between us, thick and oppressive. Then without another word, she returned to her weaving, her hands trembling as they moved. It was clear the conversation was over. I found it, eventually. After days of wandering, after each step felt heavier, like I was pushing through some unseen barrier, there it was, a jagged stone pillar, half buried in the sand, jutting up at an angle that seemed almost unnatural, as though the earth had tried to swallow it whole and only partially succeeded. The moment I saw it, I felt it. The same hum, the same pulse, only louder this time, beating through my body, through my bones. Each step closer felt like the ground was shifting beneath me, like gravity itself was pulling me in. And as I pressed my hand to the cold stone, I felt you there again. You were clearer this time. Your whisper wasn't a murmur anymore. It was distinct, almost a voice, urging me forward, deeper, telling me I was close. You remember, don't you? I stayed there, my hand on that stone, until the sun started to set. That's when the vision hit me. A flash of something that wasn't quite a memory, wasn't quite a dream. I saw a vast desert stretching out before me. Only this time it was filled with figures standing in the sand, their faces obscured, their bodies bent and broken. And behind them, towering above, was the pillar, only it wasn't buried anymore. It rose, high and dark against the sky, pulsing with a life of its own. I blinked and it was gone, but the hum, it stayed. I left Niger that night, but part of me never really left. Are you still listening? It's important. Each step from here gets darker. Each time I closed my eyes, I'd see the tower, that vision, those figures. And then, there was you. By now, you weren't just a faint presence. You were something more. I'd find myself speaking to you in those long hours of the night, and you'd answer, or maybe you wouldn't, but I'd hear something, even if it was just in my mind. The next tower was marked in Syria. By then, I was no longer trying to convince myself I was just exploring. The towers were calling to me, louder and more insistent. So, I went. Syria was a different place, barren in its own way, yet heavy with history, like the air itself was saturated with all the lives that had passed through it. People there didn't call it a tower. They didn't have a name for it. They only knew the place, a stretch of desert that stretched endlessly, where even the animals wouldn't go. They said it was cursed, that the ground pulsed with a heartbeat you could feel if you lay down, if you stayed still long enough. And that's what I did. When I got to the site, it was just empty desert. No stones, no ruins, just a vast, flat stretch of sand, nothing else. But I felt it the moment I stepped onto the ground. A low vibration, faint at first, but growing stronger with each step. I walked to the center, dropped to my knees, and pressed my ear to the ground. And there it was, a heartbeat, slow, steady, matching the rhythm of my own, pulling me in. I lay there for hours, feeling that pulse, letting it sink into me, until the line between my own heartbeat and the one beneath the ground blurred, and that's when the vision came. This time it was sharper. I saw the desert, only now there was something moving beneath the sand. Something dark and writhing. It was reaching, pushing toward the surface, and I knew. Oh, I knew. It was hungry. And then there you were again, your whisper turning into a voice. You told me things I didn't want to hear. Things that twisted through my mind, slipping away before I could hold on to them. The 7 towers of Satan, you called them. But it wasn't just a name, it was a warning. You told me, just enough to twist the knife, to leave me questioning. You said the towers weren't what they seemed, that they were older than names, older than belief, built on the bones of what fell. You whispered the words slipping through my mind like smoke. What fell? I'd asked, but you didn't answer. You didn't explain, but you left me with this. What came down can never rise again. That's why they watch. That's why they wait. I tried to hold on to your words, to their meaning, but they slid away from me, just whispers swallowed by that ever-present hum. And even now I can feel them circling in my mind, waiting to make sense of themselves, like the towers themselves are trying to speak through you. I left Syria feeling like a shell, like something had hollowed me out. You were there too, always with me, always watching, always listening. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to you, just to fill the silence. I felt like falling, like sinking into something that had no end. Things started to bleed together. Time had no meaning. The towers had latched onto me, sinking deep into my mind until everything was a haze. I'd barely sleep, and when I did, my nightmares were relentless. And you were more than a shadow by then, more than just a voice. I spoke to you constantly, more than I spoke to myself. You were my anchor, the only one I could trust, the only one who understood. I could feel you there, always listening, always urging me forward. The next mark on the map was Turkestan. The mountains there rose high and sharp, covered in a thick mist that swallowed sound. I'd been warned not to go, told the land was too treacherous, but as I climbed, felt alive, every step, every breath. Through the mist, I saw it, the twisted, crumbling archway of stone, rising from the ground like a gate to nowhere. The tower, thick and cold, as if the mist itself had frozen. As I stepped closer, I noticed the faint outline of carvings covering the stone walls, barely visible through layers of age and erosion, shapes etched into the rock, degraded but unmistakable. Figures with wings, falling, their forms twisting and breaking as they plummeted. My hand traced one of the images, a figure bound in chains, its wings bent at unnatural angles. Something about the carving pulled at me like it wanted more than just recognition. It wanted understanding. I dropped my pack and pulled out Yahia's notes, flipping through pages covered in chaotic scrawls. There, on the margin of a diagram, were fragments that matched the letters on the stone. The words looked warped by time, as though the tower itself had tried to swallow them. I whispered as I deciphered. Angels who did not stay within their dwelling, kept in chains under darkness until the judgment. The rest was illegible, swallowed by cracks that ran jagged through the text. But the meaning, fragmented as it was, sank into me like a stone in water. These weren't just carvings. This was a warning, ancient, desperate, and almost forgotten. I felt it, a presence pressing against my thoughts, ancient and overwhelming, as if the tower itself had turned its gaze on me. "What are you?" I asked aloud, my voice shaking. No response, but the hum deepened, sinking into my chest like a second heartbeat. My fingers hovered over the carvings, hesitating. Whatever I'd awakened, I wasn't sure I could control it. And yet, I pressed my palm flat against the stone. The force hit me like a wave. Images flooded my mind, figures falling, chained, bound to the earth. A voice, deep and resonant, whispered a single word.
Witness.
I stumbled back, gasping for air, and the carvings went still again. The hum. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was inside me, resonating in my chest, as if the tower had taken a piece of me to keep for itself. These were the places where they fell, bound to the earth as punishment. I felt my breath fogging in the air, my skin prickling as the cold seeped in. And then, as my fingers lingered on the stone, the memories, nightmares flooded in, too fast to understand. I was going crazy, but I heard your voice. It broke through, clearer than ever. You urged me forward, told me there was more, that I hadn't yet seen what the towers truly were. I couldn't resist. By then, I welcomed it. That night, I camped at the base of the tower, my back pressed against the cold stone. Somewhere between sleep and waking, the visions came again. I saw a vast, endless plain beneath a dark sky, where 7 towers rose from the earth, each one pulsing like a heartbeat. In the center, a figure stood, its head tilted back, arms raised as if calling to something beyond. Then it looked at me, hollow eyes, empty but piercing. It could see into my soul. In that moment, I knew. I wasn't supposed to be here. None of us were. I woke up in a cold sweat. I could feel something watching from beyond the fog. It was too late. We had to continue. The towers had stripped everything, leaving me empty. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. You were the only one left. The only one who felt real anymore. But maybe you weren't real. Maybe you were just the tower's way of keeping me close, binding me to them. The more I listened to you, the clearer you became. I needed you. You were the only thing holding me together. Mesopotamia, the birthplace of civilization, they called it. But Yahia had another name for it, the lightning rod. This is it, the last step. Mesopotamia felt alive. The air was charged like a storm was waiting to break. I followed the map to the place Yahia had marked, a spot where the ground had a life of its own. This was it, the lightning rod, where all the towers converged, holding back something that shouldn't be. My steps were deliberate, each pulse rattling my bones. I reached the edge of the chasm, crouched down, and picked up a jagged stone. This time, I wasn't just here to listen. I carved a mark into the ground, my name, dragging the stone across the earth as if to say I existed, that I was here before the darkness took me. But the ground didn't care. The mark was swallowed almost instantly, as though the tower itself rejected me. I stepped forward into the dark, into nothing, and then I understood. The towers weren't just conduits. They were alive, feeding on me, on everyone who had come before, drawing us in, binding us to them, forever. And then I heard your voice, told me I'd found what I was looking for. Hello, friend. Strange, isn't it? I thought I'd been speaking to you all along. I thought I was telling you everything as if you were the only one who understood, as if you'd been here with me from the start. But now I see it, don't I? You've been here because I brought you here. And now, you're all I have. My own voice, my only friend, my only curse. I don't know how long I've been here. Time blurs, and I'm starting to wonder if there ever was a journey, or if I've always been inside this place, just chasing phantoms, leading myself further and further down until I found this cold, dark silence, my endless loop. Maybe you'll listen to me. I don't know if you're real, but I'll keep talking and you'll keep listening, over and over. So, are you still with me, my friend? Yes, you are. We're in this together.